We did the Mishnah yesterday. And the Mishnah talked about the mitzvah of doing a zimun. Zimun is when you do the grace after meal. Before the actual grace after meal, if you have a group of 3 people or more, you join together in a zimun, preparing yourselves for or inviting the others to do the grace. And we mentioned that if they ate together as one, they are obligated in zimun. You're obligated to do a zimun. And what that means is one of them will invite the others to do the grace and together, and they recite some sentences. And in the olden days, I explained that they actually used to have it where one person would recite the entire benching and the other people would answer amen. We don't do that anymore. That part of it has changed, but the zimun still is in place. And I mentioned the reason why it changed. We don't have the same level of concentration as they used to. And so the Mishnah told us, oh boy, let me mute everyone here. So the Mishnah told us that the 3 people are obligated in doing a zimun if they ate together. Now, we didn't really discuss this, but what does it mean that they ate together? They started the meal together, they finished it together, part of the meal, the middle of the meal was together. So this is the topic of a big discussion here in Tosfos, based on a Jerusalem Talmudic statement, and based on a statement in our Gemara later, based on a later Mishnah. And the way Tosfos explains it is that if they start together, then you would be obligated in doing a zimun together if they started eating together. But if they only ended eating together, they didn't start together, then if they're ready to bench together, you're not allowed to separate. But if they're not ready to bench together, one person wants to leave early, he could theoretically separate, and he could leave leave without the zimun. So according to that understanding, what this means is that if you start the meal together, you're really supposed to do a zimun, even though you might want to leave early or something. So whoever wants to leave early should try to get the others to at least answer to the zimun, and then they don't have to bench, as long as the one person who leads the zimun, he benches, the others can listen and answer amen, and they can continue eating afterwards. Yes, Susan.
Are interruptions allowed when the 3 people start the zimun? I'm saying somebody else comes in and wants to join. Is that okay?
What does he want to join? Join the grace? He didn't eat anything.
Yeah. No, he wants to join to start eating with the people that already started after they benched.
So they benched and finished the meal. This guy comes and he wants to eat. Let him eat.
They didn't finish the meal. Okay. It's a real breakfast. In other words, it's not just a piece of cake and coffee. No. It's
right, but the zimun is done at the end when someone's ready to leave.
Right.
The zimun is the end, is the grace after meal. Yeah.
Until what point can somebody join? When can somebody join so that they are considered halakhically correct, that they
to join the zimun? Oh, okay, that's a good question. So that what we're seeing here is that even if they join, towards the end, it's also good. they could join. It's the question is if there's a leniency for someone to leave without the zimun. That's really what we're discussing. But to join, so they came late, they could join.
Okay.
But that when they join, if they start the meal together, that creates a more bigger, stronger obligation to do the zimun properly. And if they didn't really start the meal together, then there's more leniency involved for someone to take off. Now, I should mention that Tosfos does not end there. There is one other issue, and this is something discussed in the Jerusalem Talmud, and that is, what does it mean the beginning they start together? Does it mean they eat the first olive size together, or does it mean they decide to sit down together, or does it mean somewhere in the middle of the meal they're eating something together, even if they didn't exactly start? And it's a topic of discussion in the Jerusalem Talmud, an argument there. And the way Tosfos concludes here is that he says the Rif holds that it's the initial explanation there, and that is that when they decide to eat together, that's the beginning, and that creates more of a obligation for them to do a zimun. So that's the way Tosfos concludes here. So what comes out from this is that eating together, no matter what, you could always do a zimun, and the issue is if someone were to leave before doing a zimun, would he be allowed to? And that would be an issue depending on if he started the meal together or not. The simple way around this whole issue is whoever wants to leave, you just lead the zimun and let the other people continue eating. And then you have no problem. You could just, you just say, Rabbi Saim Yavel benching, or Rabbi Saim Varech, and you do the benching and say, you guys can continue eating. I'm going to bench and I'm going to do a zimun with you to do the benching, but you don't have to stop eating. You can continue afterwards. And that would be a way around this issue. But if someone were to want to leave early, if you didn't start together, that would be an option, maybe depending on what Shulchan Aruch concludes. If you could get, but at least the way Tosfos seems to say here is that would be okay theoretically to take off early if you didn't start together. Now, the Mishnah talked about different scenarios where you're doing something that you're not really you're eating something you're not supposed to eat, and can you do a zimun with such a food item? And the examples that the Mishnah gave were demai. That was the first example, demai. And demai is an interesting category because really demai is this produce that we're not sure if the individual who prepared it, gave it to you, you bought it from, we don't know if they separated the appropriate tithings. And according to biblical law, we probably could rely on the fact that the majority of people do separate the proper tithings. And it's good enough. We could assume they were separated. The majority of people do it. It's good enough. But the rabbis made a decree that it's not good enough. And you need to separate tithings when you eat such produce. When you eat produce of demai, you need to separate tithings just in case the previous owner, the person whose field it was grown in case he didn't do that, you need to separate these tithings just to be sure that it was separated. Now, in this scenario, in this situation here, you didn't do that. You didn't separate it. You ate the demai. And now the question is, can they join you for the grace after meal, for the zimun? can they join you for this in this communal grace, this communal blessing? Now, the problem is that when you eat bread of demai, again, it's the grain. They made bread from the grain, that the grain, we're not sure if they took out Meiser, if they took out the tithe that's supposed to go to the Levite, and we're not sure if they did. We do know that they took out they always would take out the portion that goes to the Kohen, 2%, but we are not sure. Probably they did take the Meiser, but it's possible they didn't. Majority of people would take the Meiser, even simple people that aren't so careful. Majority do take Meiser, but there are a minority that don't, so we're not sure. So we're going to tell you, you really should not be eating this. But you did. You ate bread. They made bread. You made bread from this grain, and you ate this bread, and you're with two other people. And the question is, so can you do the Zimun together? Well, what's basically the question? Well, you're not really supposed to, is this called a meal? Did you really eat a meal? This is a prohibited meal. It's not a meal of a kosher meal, so to speak. So, which also, I guess, would apply if someone is in a scenario where, let's say, they need to eat non-kosher. Would they be, let's say it's a life and death situation? Would they be allowed to bench a zimun with others? So the Mishnah spoke about two categories. One was cases where it was prohibited or it's not appropriate to do, but it's still considered okay. And the other category was where it's not okay. You ate something that's totally prohibited. And these two categories, it's interesting because there is a Mishnah in another tractate that talks about a scenario where a Kohen eats truma. Let's say a Kohen was given a portion, holy tithe, separation that was separated, 2% of the grain was given to the Kohen. Now that grain is holy, has to be eaten in holiness. As we mentioned in the beginning of our tractate, a Kohen would have to go to mikveh if he was impure in order to eat truma. And now someone gave him truma and he made bread out of it. And now he wants to eat this bread, this truma bread. And he's eating together with his friends. And they're eating regular kosher bread. And he's eating Kohen bread. I'm calling it Kohen bread because he's the only one allowed to eat this bread. The other people eating with him are not allowed to eat it. It would be prohibited for them to eat. It would be like non-kosher for them. They're not Kohens. They're totally prohibited from eating this bread. And the Kohen, is allowed to eat it. It's called truma. It's truma bread. I'll call it Kohen bread. So it's only allowed for a Kohen. So would that be okay to do a zimun? That's one interesting case. But I'm going to give you a more interesting case. And this was applicable to me a number of years ago when I made a bris for one of my children. So I wanted to have fleischiks. I wanted to have meat, at least for the sandik, for the moil, and for myself, the father of the child. However, if you cater a meat meal for a bris, it's very expensive. So I was thinking of having the typical bris menu of lox and cream cheese for everyone else. And on my table, I was going to have bagels with some pastrami. Now, the question is, can we bench together? If I'm having a meat meal, can we join together with all the other people who are eating a dairy meal? And it's customary to do a grace after meal with 10 people when you have a bris. Just ends up that way. That's the common thing. And the question is, can you join together? Because they cannot eat your food and you cannot eat their food. Why can't they eat my food? Because they ate dairy.
But you all ate bread. You had different stuffing. If I have a tuna sandwich and you have egg salad, can we bench?
Egg salad and tuna? Why not?
I don't know. You had a different thing that I had in the same bagel.
So Isaac wants to say that really it shouldn't be a problem, because if you only ate, let's say a cheese Danish or a grilled cheese, and I only ate a meat pie, then it would be a problem. But because I'm eating a bagel and you're eating a bagel, so who cares if you're also eating some dairy and I'm also eating some meat? But it's two separate entities, and the fact that we're eating bread, that should be good enough. That's what you're saying, Isaac, right? In other words, we both had bagels. So I also had some meat. You also had some cheese and who knows what. But the bagel should be good enough for us to be able to bench together. Is that your claim, Isaac?
That is exactly my. I mean, we all think it's separate meals, but I don't think. I wonder if there's what the issue is of having them both on the same table.
No. We're not talking about an Isser prohibition of having them on the same table. That's another story, and that deals with
that's
laws
what I'm saying.
Of having
that's
a separation and so on. Yeah.
If you don't have the same, that's the question. Are you sitting around the same table?
Right.
That you're together.
No, I am not sure. Now, the scenario that I was referring to for a bris was that the head table would have meat and the other tables would all have dairy. That was the scenario that I'm talking about. So we're not dealing with that type of issue, but your question, which is the fact that we're all eating bagels and I'm also having some meat and they're also having some cheese. Well, who cares? We all ate bagels. We should be able to bench because we can all eat the bagels.
I agree with that. And I think that even if you're sitting at the same table, as long as you have a separation between the people who are eating the meat and the people who are eating the dairy, you can bench together. So it seems like you should all be able to bench together.
So I'm not sure if the in the situation by a bris where people are eating, they're eating a lox and cream cheese, bagel. Does that make it that the bagel is now, this is their meal was a dairy bread. And I was eating a pastrami sandwich. So my bagel is now a fleishik bagel. And in that scenario, it could be that you can't rely on Isaac's leniency. All I can tell you was that when this occurred, I asked the Rav, and he said, no, you can't bench together. You won't be able to bench together. So I ended up switching my plan, and I had them have parov cream cheese, and this way we didn't serve dairy for everyone. We just served parov, and the head table had a few pieces of salami or pastrami, whatever. And this is by the
way, Rebbe, I wasn't giving a leniency. I was asking. I didn't have an answer.
Okay. No, I understood. You were questioning if that could work. Maybe it would. My point is, I didn't really delve into the depth of it, but I'm guessing that the reason why the rabbi might have said that it was a problem was because most people, they're not just eating dairy and eating a plain bagel. It's generally people at a bris, they're eating a bagel with the cream cheese on it. So it's not just they're having a meal and they have bread like a Shabbos table. You have challah and you have cholent, and you're not exactly eating the challah with the cholent, but at a bris, you're sort of the common food is the people come there special. They don't even know you, but they know the lox and the cream cheese.
If you get a cholent with too much liquid, it's a pleasure to have that challah.
Right. So anyway, I'm not sure what the real bottom line halacha would be in this scenario. And Simone brought up a good point, and Isaac brought up a good point. But this does apply here to our Mishnah. This is very applicable to what we're learning here. And I brought the case of the Kohen eating truma bread because that is the source of this issue, is that other Mishnah there, where it deals with one person who's allowed to eat this food, but the other people aren't allowed to eat your food. So you have truma, the Kohen has truma, he's eating truma, which is holy, and he's allowed to eat it, but the other people he's eating with are Israelites, and they're not allowed to eat it. And they be allowed to join the Zimun? And the understanding, Taisus brings this Mishnah here in Erchin. He brings it from Erchin. Hakol mitzdarfen lazimun kayanim leviim and Yisraelim. So it says over there that everyone can join together for a zimun. Kohanes, Levites, Israelites. And the Gemara says, of course, why not? The Jews, why can't they join together? And the Gemara answers, no, the Kohane's eating truma, the Israelite is eating chulin. And the conclusion there is that that's what the Mishnah tells us over there, that you could join together, even though one of them is eating something that the others can't. But since the others can eat with you, then it makes it okay. In other words, I can't eat with them, but they can eat with me. And once that happens, once you have a scenario where they could join you in your meal, so it doesn't matter that you can't eat with them. For example, in this scenario, the Israelites cannot eat what the Kohen's eating, but the Kohen is allowed to eat what the Israelites are eating. So that would be a scenario where it would be permissible. Another example that Taisvis gives would be some people are careful to only eat pas Yisroel, bread baked from a Jew. And there are three opinions about bread baked by a non-Jew, if it's allowed or not allowed. And we're dealing with a non-Jewish baker who's not baking it for personal use. He's baking it for commercial use. He's selling it, baking it to sell. So when a non-Jew is baking bread at like a bakery, would you be allowed, and assume with the understanding that there's no non-kosher ingredients in any of the bread, would you be allowed to eat that bread? So some people are careful. They're called nizhar. They're careful from pas akum, from pas of a palter, from pas of a bread of a baker that's a non-Jew. But not everyone is careful. Some people totally disregard this law because they're not extra. They don't want to take the more strict view. They take the more lenient view. And then you have somewhere in the middle where some people are lenient when there's no other option. There's no other bread in your city. So if you don't have any other bread, that would be another leniency. You could rely on that. And then some people don't care. Even if there is kosher bread, they rely on the lenient view that it would be allowed to have bread from a baker. Now, and then some people are strict and they don't have any. So what happens if you're eating a sandwich that, because you're careful, you only eat from a kosher baker, the Jew turned on the fire. So you have pas Yisroel, it's called, bread of a Jew, and you're eating together with someone else who has his Arnold's bread. That's that's a non-Jewish baker. Would you be allowed to do the grace together? So in this scenario, you're not allowed to eat his bread, but he's allowed to eat your bread. In other words, you've accepted. Or another example would be, let's say you have made a vow that you will never benefit from this other person. You're angry at him or whatever, you made a vow. So you're now not allowed to benefit and eat from his bread, but he's allowed to benefit from your bread. So these are scenarios where you could question if you could do the zimun, if you could do a grace after meal together.
You couldn't, because he would benefit from the zimun.
I'm not sure it's a mitzvahs lav lahanes nitnu. And Tosfos doesn't seem to bring your thing up. So I guess it's because mitzvahs lav lahanes nitnu that it's probably that would be the answer to your question. That it's not considered a benefit. It's a spiritual benefit. What did you say, Susan?
Why would you be breaking bread, or even be in the same room if you made a vow that you're not going to be around that person?
Because you both ended up going to the pizza shop.
Okay.
You were both hungry, and you ended up in the pizza shop. And there was
But
only
you're
one
still going
seat
to say
available.
hello, and you're still going to be, a human being, or you're going to be like nasty and
Susan, you can be very nice to him and just not benefit from him. That's all he said. He didn't say I'm never going to see him or I'm not going to be with him. I'm not going to benefit from him.
In other words, you're not going to benefit. You're not going to. But the rabbi's talking about sharing food, aren't you?
Well, the idea of the zimun is that you are sharing a meal together. You're not physically eating his food and he's not physically eating your food, but that's the concept of zimun, is that you are sharing a meal together. And so it has to be that at least some of you can partake of the other person's food, even though you're not doing that. But it has to be that. That's the situation here.
In order for the zimun to be kosher, you have to share the food.
No, you don't have to share it. It has to be in a way that it could be shared.
I see.
You are as if you're sharing food because you're sharing a meal together. Simone, did you have a question? Or?
Yikes.
Yeah, so I was just going to say that the other situation that you mentioned where the Kohen is eating truma and the Levium or the Israelim are eating regular food, and the question of can they eat together, and all the situations that you described, it makes sense that they can eat together, because as I understand the whole idea of this who you can eat with, which is also related to who drinking wine, is to not to have social relationships with non-Jews. So the converse is that to encourage social relationships with Jews, you should be allowed to eat with, Kohen is eating truma and you're Yisrael, you're eating regular stuff. Well, of course you can eat together, and all these other situations you described, because those are the things that we want to encourage, as opposed to the other one, which is we're not encouraging.
Yeah, we're not really dealing with that situation of if you're allowed to eat with someone else. Here we're dealing with eating someone else's food. We're dealing with you sharing a meal with someone, and it's not connected to the situation. You might end up eating his meat while you're eating dairy. That we're not worried about. You possibly will end up doing that and he's going to eat your truma. We're not dealing with that. That would be an issue of eating on the same table, where you could have to make a hecker. You might have to but I'm not. That's another group of laws that we're sort of putting on the side. We'll deal with that if you need, when we need to deal with those laws, how to get around it, how to get around those prohibitions, that we could deal with. Here, we're not dealing with those issues now. Here, we're simply dealing with the ability to do a zimun, or the obligation to do a zimun, which applies only when you are able to share each other's food. And it's like you're breaking bread together, you're eating together. And if you can't eat his food and he can't eat your food, then you would not be able to do a zimun. And the only reason a Kohen could do a zimun with an Israelite is because the Israelite's food could be eaten by the Kohen as well. So that's, but the opposite scenario, or the case where neither could eat each other's food, that it's not because something might come out of it or something. Simply you can't eat that. You can't share food. Then it's not a zimun. It's not a real meal together. So I'm not saying your point is a valid point. I'm not saying it's not valid, but that's not the emphasis here. What we're dealing with is if this can be a meal that's that you're joining together with each other.
Rebbe,
so your point is a good point, but it has to be. Its rules, deserve.
In terms of clarifying, I was only going to say that we are simply taking the halacha. When three Jews eat together, one starts with this afterwards. We're defining what the word together means. That's all, back and forth, different ways. You have to exchange food. Can you be in the same room? If I'm outside and I heard you, can I join in? We're going to get into all of these permutations, but now that we went through the eating together, depends what kind of food and it depends how much and everything, the eating, now we're getting to the word together and
Okay,
taking
good.
apart in different ways.
Good point. Good point. That's a good point. It's but I will tell you, there is the commentaries do mention that it's not about together. Is it even called eating?
Yes.
So three eating together, it's either an issue of the word together, which is what you said, Isaac, or as some of the commentaries mention, it might not be called eating. Like if you eat non-kosher food, is it three people eating, or is it only two people eating? And then you could have the word together there, but the eating part, it could be an issue. Because
Right.
when you eat non-kosher food, is that really called eating?
Rebbe,
And,
you go through each word that way.
Right.
Three Jews eating together. What does a Jew mean? What does
Three
eating mean? What does together mean?
Right.
I'm not sure about three, but yeah,
Now-
I think that could also be a question.
Right.
What is a man?
Now, I will also mention that when we're talking about the issue of food that is prohibited, there are two opinions. If a person recites a bracha on food that they're not supposed to eat. In other words, if a person is transgressing and they can't control themselves,
You're talking about
And-
deny?
they love McDonald's the cheeseburger. They can't control themselves especially because the price is so cheap, and they're driving right.
Cone an hour after the hamburger.
What is that?
An ice cream cone an hour after
Ice cream
the
cone.
hamburger.
Okay. Isaac has a more practical example, but the scenario where a person is eating his McDonald's, he can't control himself. Should he recite a bracha on the McDonald's hamburger cheeseburger? Or Isaac's scenario, should you recite a bracha on the ice cream cone after your meat, and you're not you're supposed to wait 6 hours from meat to dairy. So would you recite a bracha? Or you're drinking wine that's non-kosher wine? Should you recite a bracha? So the common understanding and the simple reading of the Gemaras that deal with this is that you would not recite a bracha, because if you recite a bracha, it's like blasphemy. You're like stabbing God in the back. You're saying a bracha, but you're not allowed to. You're not allowed to eat this. So it's better not to say a bracha. In fact, there was a child who decided to become religious that was in her parents' house, and she had no choice because how could she keep kosher? So she had this question: what should she do? Because she has to live. She's a child. When she reaches the age of an adult, she'll be able to take off and keep kosher. She'll get a job and she'll whatever. But in the meantime, she's a child. She's going to school. She's stuck in her parents' house. She has no choice. So she had this whole issue. What should she do about eating kosher? So they advised her to every meal she eats, she should eat bread. Why? Because at least she won't have any shilas, no questions about saying the blessings, because bread is kosher. All the other food is an issue, but the bread is kosher, and she can say the blessing on the bread, and she can say the blessing on the grace after meal with no questions, because here she'll be able to eat kosher bread. She's going to eat other food because you can't live maybe at least a child. I don't know how easy it is for them just to eat bread. So she's going to eat some non-kosher food during her childhood because, She's not an adult yet to leave home, but at least there won't be any question about the blessings because she's eating bread. She could say the bracha on the bread, and she'll say the grace after meal after the bread. So that was a solution to someone who wanted to keep kosher as a child. But there is an argument among the Rishonim, among the commentaries, and one of the famous view of the Rambam is that you cannot recite a bracha on non-kosher food. But the Ravid argues and says you do have to recite a bracha on the non-kosher food. And the way he learns the statements in the Talmud that says it's blasphemy is that you have to do it. It doesn't say you don't do it. It just says that it ends up being mena'et, but you still have to do it. Otherwise, the Gemara should have said don't do it. So the Ravid argues on the Rambam. The Rambam says you don't say a bracha, but the Ravid says you do say a bracha. Now that deals with that sort of boils down to our Mishnah, because our Mishnah talks about doing a zimun on non-kosher foods, and really this Mishnah is an extension. Do you even say the blessing? In other words, it's an extension. Our Mishnah is saying don't do the zimun. Is this saying, but you would do the blessing? In other words, we're dealing with some of the food here is non-kosher. You didn't separate the tithings. That's non-kosher. You can't eat that. You want it to be a pig? That's also non-kosher. This is also another type of non-kosher. If you didn't tithe the food, if you eat food produce that's not tithe, that's non-kosher. If you eat questionable tithe, that's a different story. That's called demai. That's a different scenario. That's not appropriate to eat, but there are scenarios where the rabbis permitted it and so on. And that, that's demai. But the case where you didn't tithe the food, that's non-kosher. Non-kosher food, you should not be reciting a bracha in the first place. Our Mishnah talks about not reciting the zimun, but really it's an extension of not even saying, you're not even going to say a grace after meal. At least that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is you will say the grace, you just don't do a zimun together. But
so the Ravid is saying you should make a bracha and you deserve an extra patch for it.
Right, something like
that. It's a double thing to Hashem. I know enough to have to make a bracha, but I'm still eating this.
However it is, but that's the applicable laws would apply if you were in a scenario, life and death scenario. Should you say a bracha or not? You're not getting punished for it. The question is, should you say a bracha? But it would be a safek bracha. It would be a questionable bracha. But that would be the scenario. So again, we have this Mishnah here, and the beginning cases of the Mishnah were not fully non-kosher. One case was demai. Now I should mention a law that someone who's poverty-stricken is allowed to eat demai. It says poor. I don't even know if you have to be poverty-stricken. Just simply, if you fall into the category of poor, the person who's poor is allowed to eat demai, doesn't have to separate. There are scenarios where demai is permissible. Our Mishnah talks about a case where a person ate it. Can they do a zimun? And the Mishnah says yes. Now, another case that our Mishnah gives as an example is a person ate meiser rishon. So he ate this meiser rishon. In other words, there's bread made from the first tithing, and the truma was separated from this tithing. There was a truma that was separated, but nevertheless, the person ate this meiser rishon, and what happened is that the meiser rishon, this first tithing was everything was the stuff was separated, but it was you messed up the order of the tithings because you never gave the initial tithing portion to the Kohen. And because you didn't give the initial portion to the Kohen, you first gave the Levite his portion, and now you're eating it from the Levite's portion. But it was never, the Kohen is supposed to first get his portion, and that wasn't done. And what you did was you separated the Levites portion, and then you gave a portion from the Levites portion to the Kohen, but you messed up the order. So basically, this is food that it shouldn't have been this way. You messed up the order, and you never ended up giving the Kohen his initial amount, but it's not really obligated. But bottom line is that, and we'll see the specific scenario in the Gemara, but bottom line is that you are allowed to do a zimun. Then we had another case where you separated Meiser Sheni, the second tithing, which you're supposed to eat in Jerusalem, or you could redeem it for money and take the money to Jerusalem and spend the money in Jerusalem and eat something in Jerusalem with that money and celebrate God's blessings to you. Now, the problem here is you didn't redeem it for the extra fifth. You're supposed to add an extra fifth when you redeem this type of produce, and you didn't add the extra fifth, which is like a little sort of like a penalty for redeeming it. It's not, I shouldn't say penalty, I don't know a better word. There's a certain additional charge you're supposed to add for redeeming it, and you didn't add that charge. So because of that, you really should not be you shouldn't be eating the redeemed produce without adding that charge and nullifying it, redeeming it on the money. And what you did was you redeemed the money. So in other words, it's $100 of oranges that you now redeemed for $100 bill. But you really should have added 100. It should be 125. You're supposed to add a fifth, which is actually a quarter. So you would add $25. So you redeemed the case of oranges for $100, but you never added that additional fee. And so therefore, you shouldn't be eating these oranges, and you did. Now, I gave an example of oranges. It really should be grain because you made bread out of it, and now you want to do a zimun. So well, let's jump to grain. So you have this a case of grain. It's $100, and you should have added made it $125. Instead, you just have $100. You're bringing that $100 to Israel, no problem. But now you want to eat the grain before you and you never added that additional fee, that additional $25, and you're made the grain into bread, and you're eating the bread. So the law is you could bench a zimun. Next time, what you should do is add the extra $25 first. But here you didn't. It's okay. You could do the zimun. And then we spoke about a shamish, and the shamish ate a kezias, and the shamish is the helper. He's the butler, and he's walking around. He's standing. He's not sitting. But the Mishnah says he could also join in this zimun. And then we mentioned the kuti, who, according to the final conclusion, is really not supposed to join a zimun because he's not considered Jewish. But in the initial, many of the Mishnahs at that point, they considered the Kutim Jewish. And until a time later on when they found that the Kutim were worshiping like an idol, then they realized these people are not sincere. And we considered all the Kutim non-Jewish from then on. But in the Mishnah, our Mishnah, we're sort of at a stage before they came to that conclusion. And many of the Mishnahs follow this view that the Kutim were okay. And but later on, of course, the conclusion is they weren't kosher Jews. And what ended up that they have a lot of Mishnahs that follow this earlier view. So here the Mishnah says a kuti you could join for a zimun. Now, what were the cases that you can't join a zimun? So if you ate tevel is food that's not demai. It's totally the separations were not separated. Or you have meiser rishon, the tithing that the Levite did not separate what he's supposed to. Is the Levite is supposed to separate from what he's given a certain portion, 10% to the Kohen. He didn't separate that. So that would be totally prohibited for anyone. Even a Levite is not allowed to eat that until he separates that from the Kohen. It's like non-kosher. And then the next case was Meiser Sheni and Hegdish. You have a box, you have a case of grain, and you didn't redeem it for the $100. Before we spoke about you redeemed it for $100, but you didn't add the additional fee, $25. So you only redeemed it for $100. Here, you didn't redeem it in the first place. So you're in your mind, I'm going to bring $100 to Jerusalem. I'm going to bring $125 to Jerusalem, and we're going to rejoice in Israel, in Jerusalem, over this produce. And I shouldn't have to carry the whole case of grain on my back, I'll bring $125 to Jerusalem. We'll rejoice over there. But you didn't redeem it. You're thinking about it maybe, but you didn't redeem it. Here, you're not allowed to eat that grain until you redeem it. It's grain that's meant to be. It has a certain level of holiness to it. That's supposed to only be eaten in Jerusalem, and unless you redeem it, you have to eat in Jerusalem. Here, you're not in Jerusalem, and you're eating it, so you can't do a zimun in these scenarios. And the same thing would apply Hegdish. You donated something to Hegdish. Let's say you have an extra case of grain, and you want to bring it a case of flour. You want to donate it. You said, I'm donating this to the temple treasury. Now, that's very nice, but now you realize it's very heavy. I don't want to carry it all the way to Jerusalem. So what do? You could redeem it. Oh, I'll bring $100 to Jerusalem, $125 to Jerusalem. I'll bring it, but you didn't do it. You didn't redeem it for the $125. So therefore, right now you're eating holy grain, holy wheat without redeeming it, and it's totally non-kosher. You cannot do a zimun. And according to the Rambam, which is the common accepted view, you can't even recite bracha on that bread. Now, the shamish that ate less than a kazayas, he didn't eat enough. It's not called eating. And the goy, a non-Jew, you can't do a zimun. And then the Mishnah talks about the noshim, avadim, and tatanim, women, slaves, and children that you don't do a zimun with. And we mentioned yesterday about the possibility that maybe if they were alone, if there were only women, if the women themselves could do a zimun. And but definitely the women don't do a zimun together with slaves and with children. Now, until how much do you need to eat and to do a zimun? Now, the Mishnah ended off with either a kazayas or a kabetza, either an egg size, an olive size, or an egg size. Now, I translated the Mishnah according to the most common, most popular way of translating it is that you need to eat this amount in order to participate in the zimun. Rashi doesn't learn this way. And Rashi learns that you would exempt the others in other words, you need to eat a certain amount to lead the zimun. That's the way Rashi seems to be learning it. That to lead the zimun, would you need a kazayas or a kabetza? Now, according to Rashi, what it seems like is that everyone would agree that it would be enough to have a kazayas to participate in the zimun. But to lead the zimun, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you need to have a kibetza, an egg size. But the common view and common understanding is again, Rashi would hold to participate in this. Maybe you don't even need a kazai. It's unclear what you would need to participate, I should say. But to lead it, that's what the question of the Mishnah is, the way Rashi learns. You either need a kazayas or a kibetza to lead it. And according to the other commentaries, they all seem to say that it's simply to participate in the zimun. How much would you need? Either a kazayas or a kibetza. It's not about specifically leading the zimun. It's about participating. Okay, so now we're up to the Gemara. Any questions? No. Okay. So the Gemara says, "Menohani milu." From where do we know these things? And from where do we know that 3 are enough to do a zimun? And so the Gemara brings verses. Amar Ravasi, Ravasi says, Damar Kra, because the verse says, Gadlu Lashem iti, exalt Hashem with me. They should exalt. Gadlu is a plural, which means 2, at least 2. Gadlu, they should exalt. Hash Lashem, to Hashem, iti with me, which means a third person. I'm the third person. And we will exalt Hashem's name together. So this is the verse that you see three people are mitzdarif, joined together to do a zimun, to do this berchas hazimun. And Rebavo says mehacha from another verse. Ki shem Hashem ekra, because the name of Hashem I will call out. Havu goydel leloikeinu, they should give greatness to our God. Havu is a plural, so it sounds like one person telling two people, at least two, minimally two people, that we should give praise to Hashem. So ultimately, what comes out from this is that you need three people. Now, the first verse that we brought was a verse from Tehillim. The second verse that we brought is a verse from Parshas Ha'azinu. So obviously, the second verse is maybe a more significant source because it's from the actual Torah, rather than we don't always bring sources from the prophets and the books of the writings. But the benefit of the Gadol Hashem Iti, why does Rav Asi bring that verse, is because the verse before Gadol Hashem Iti says, Avarcha es Hashem b'chol eis, says, I will bless Hashem at all times. So it uses the term bracha in that previous verse. And that's why Rav Asi wants to use this verse as the source for the zimun. And so that would be these two opinions. So Rav Avo brings a source from the Chumash itself. Rav Asi brings a source from Tehillim. But ultimately, three people are enough for a zimun. Now, there's room to think that maybe you need 10 people, because generally, ein davar shebekdusha pachos me'asar, you can't do anything without 10. So you might have thought that you need a minyan in order to do a zimun. And here, the Gemara brings a source that this would we would be able to do the zimun even without 10, even with 3. So the Gemara continues and says, Amar Rav Chanan bar Abba. Rav Chanan bar Abba says, Minayin lo'ina amen shle'yagbiya koila yosem and amufar. How do we know that a person who answers amen should not scream it? He shouldn't say it louder than the person who recited the bracha. In other words, when a person says a bracha, you're supposed to answer amen. Amen means I agree, true. And so someone else said a bracha, and you say amen, contrary to what most people, many people out there in the world, they think they're supposed to say amen to their own brachas. There are cases that a person does, but it's very rare. The one bracha that we know that we say amen is by Boinei Berachim Yerushalayim amen. In the third blessing of the benching, we say amen to our own bracha. Very rare that you do that. That would be one example where you do. Normally, you don't say amen to your own bracha. Amen means I agree or it's true. And you do that when someone else says a bracha. It's a mitzvah to say amen. But our Gemara tells us that you're not supposed to say amen louder than the person who said the bracha. Shenemar, as it says, Gadol Hashem iti, exalt Hashem with me. And we will together elevate Hashem's name. So when it says iti, we see that it should be with me. In other words, similar to my voice and not louder. equal to me. Now, the Gemara continues and says, Reb Shimon ben Pazi, Reb Shimon ben Pazi says, Minayin, how do you know? She'ein hamatargem, that the person who does the targum, which is the translation of the Torah, he's not allowed, she'ein hamatargem rishoi, he's not permitted, lahagbia koiloi, to lift his voice, yoiser min hakoire, more than the Baal Koire, more than the person reading the Torah. You have to understand, we don't do this nowadays, but there are, I believe, the Teimanim maybe do this. I was once in a shul. Oh boy, did it take a long time. Every pasuk they read, they had someone else reading the Targum, I guess the Onkelos, the Aramaic translation. So it would never work in an Ashkenazic synagogue because we don't have the discipline that they have in Sephardic shuls. But the Sephardic, I was in a Sephardic shul once, and they actually did this. It must have been maybe like a 4-hour service. It was like Rosh Hashanah almost. But they did it. They had someone reading every verse. They read the verse in the Chumash, and then they stopped, and someone else read the Targum, and they went back to the Chumash and back to the Targum. Now, in the olden days, that's the way it was done. We don't speak Aramaic, and I believe that's probably when it ended, this concept of the translating the Chumash into Aramaic, because we don't understand Chumash, we don't understand Aramaic even worse. Our Chumash is probably better than the Aramaic, but the original way that the Torah was read was someone would do the Targum, would do the Aramaic translation, and the Gemara here is talking about how loud person should do it, and it's explaining that when you're translating it, you shouldn't do it louder than the person who actually read it in the Torah. Yes, Simone.
It seems like a great idea and something that we should do today. Not to translate it into Aramaic, but to translate it into our vernacular, which is English. Somebody would read the Hebrew, and then somebody would translate it into English. Seems terrific.
So there are some shuls that the rabbi, I've been in a few shuls, Chabad shuls, where the rabbi actually does like a little summary of the portion, every single aliyah, and that is based on this tradition. It's not exactly the same, but it seems to be based on this, that people should have an understanding of the Chumash. But at the same time, most shuls have a English translation Chumash. They have either the Art Scroll, or now the Kahas Chumash is available, one volume. They used to have the Gutnik Chumash. There are a number of Chumashim. They used to have the Hertz, the old day, the Hertz Chumash. So you could say that we don't necessarily need the someone to translate it, because we have books, and people in between aliyahs, or you could always follow along, or with the English, so we have it right in front of us. But it's a good idea. It's an interesting idea. I'm not. It wouldn't help even if I decided we should do it. So I'm not going to put my stamp on this idea, Simone. But it sounds like a good idea. My stamp wouldn't work. But if you want to speak to some big rabbis, it might be able to get some traction.
I have been in shuls where they do that. I think in one of the Boca Raton Chabad shuls they do that.
Not every verse.
No, like you said, a summary, aliyah by aliyah. Yeah.
Right. I'm saying, but if you want to try to get people to do it, you got to speak to a big rabbi to initiate such a new thing. It sounds like a good idea. I'm not disagreeing. I don't know about the Ashkenazic Jews, but maybe among Sephardic, I don't know. But Susan, do you have a question, or?
I was going to ask you, was this temple here in Miami?
No, it was in Israel.
It was in Israel.
Israel. Not all Sephardic Jews. This was a one group, maybe Taimani or Indian. I don't remember. It was like a unique.
Wow.
It was a unique synagogue. I was stuck in some village there, and popped in over there.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Many years. I'm going back to 25 years. Yeah. Okay, so let's see. It's 11 o'clock. Okay, we're gonna stop here. Sei gesund, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Rabbi.
Bye,
Rabbi.
everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you. Stay safe.